I see some familiar faces. It's great to see you. I see some not so familiar faces also. It's nice to meet you. As some of you know, Dr. Hansen and I do the career advising hours. The drop-in hour is on Thursdays at 8 a.m., but we do have some options. For example, for those of you who are on the West Coast, please do not be dissuaded. We will accommodate you. We're not expecting you to come at 5 a.m. to a meeting. So we're very much looking forward to talking to more of you and having the opportunity to discuss careers. As you know, today we are going to talk about Dr. Hansen's career, Dr. Hansen's trajectory. I am delighted to have the opportunity to welcome Dr. Chelsea Hansen to the Day in the Life series. The Day in the Life series is a series that really has been in existence with SPS since the beginning of the program. This is something that our program director, Dr. Marquez Lewis, came up with as a way to help students to know what it's like to actually be a practitioner in one of the subdisciplines of psychology. So we have had guests in the past who were IO psychologists, developmental psychologists. We've had school psychologists. We've had a wide variety of different subdisciplines of psychology represented. And, this has been an exciting journey, and we're delighted to now have Dr. Hansen participate in it. So Dr. Hansen is full-time faculty at CUNY SPS, and Dr. Hansen is obviously a pleasure to work with, and so it was very exciting for us that she agreed to do this particular day in the life. Now, Dr. Hansen's background is in clinical psychology, but she has extensive experience in a wide variety of different areas, including 15 years in higher education. I am going to turn things over to her so she can tell you a little bit more about her work as an advocate for families of neurodiverse individuals, and just in general about her advocacy work and her extensive experiences with families and children. So welcome, Dr. Hansen, and thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me, and thank you for that warm welcome, Dr. Alicia. This is a real pleasure, and I'm excited for today. So I'm going to share my screen with you all. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Right. Okay, so as Dr. Alicia mentioned, I'm a full-time faculty member here at SPS, and I've been teaching here since 2017 and have been in higher education for now almost 17 years, which is crazy. Time has just flown by. I have worked in a variety of capacities as a clinician and in higher education that I look forward to talking to you about. I have 2 children, both of whom are neurodiverse. And so my passion is in helping, as Dr. Alicia said, the neurodiverse population and their families, and doing a lot of advocacy work for that. I'm originally from the Midwest, so I was very happy with the outcome of the game on Sunday. Go Chiefs! And live in Florida now. So yes, it's gonna start with psychology and why I chose it and my path. So
Dr. Hansen, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. Could you can you put yourself in presentation mode or in book mode so we can see the full screen?
yes.
Thank you. So while Dr. Hansen does that, let me tell you a little bit about how the things will go today. So we're going to start off with a presentation that'll last approximately 20 to 30 minutes. After the presentation, there will be time for questions. You can type your questions in the chat and I will ask them, or at the time of questions, you will have the opportunity to unmute yourself and ask questions. So again, we're very excited about this presentation and we hope that you'll ask lots of questions. Excited to have you here as well. All right, Dr. Hansen, sorry for interrupting and thank you.
Sure. Can you see that better now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I just want to start with kind of why I chose psychology and my background. So I grew up very from a background where no one in my family had gone to school. I'm a first generation college student. My father had an eighth grade education and my mother a ninth grade education. And so I grew up in a very low socioeconomic status home, and education just wasn't a priority. The priority in our culture was that you just get a job and you start helping with bills and things like that. So learning about choosing a college and creating that path and filling out financial aid forms and things like that was all new to me. We have a really great series here about first generation college students that I urge you all to check out if you haven't yet, but that was helpful for me. I ended up choosing psychology because my sister was interested in it. My sister is 15 years older than me, and she was always reading psychology books and self-help books, and I just thought it was so interesting. And I wound up graduating high school when I was 16, and the first college course that I took was a psychology course, and I fell in love with it and never turned back. So that's kind of how I got into the field. And now it's not uncommon for students to be dual enrollment students and to graduate early and things like that. But at that time, it was fairly rare. So I was, excuse me, 16 in a room full of much older people trying to keep up and trying to learn as much as I could. And I just knew that psychology was for me for that very first class. So I was really fortunate in that regard. In terms of education, because I was at 16, I went to a community college. This was also more affordable for me as I was kind of figuring out financial aid and how to do all this. So I started at Scott Community College, which was conveniently right next to my high school in Iowa. And so I was able to still stay at home, given my age. And then I went to the University of Iowa, go Hawks. And then on to Virginia Wesleyan University. I moved closer to the beach. I knew I wanted to get out of the Midwest. As wonderful as it was to grow up there, I was sick of the cold. And also that was a great program. I got the opportunity for my first clinical experience when I was at Wesleyan, and I worked with the Center for Child and Family Services. And one of the reasons I chose to do this, and I always encourage my students to get clinical experience as early as you can if you think that's going to be your path, was because it was a really challenging environment. And I thought I should just throw myself into these hard situations and see if I can handle it, because it would be good to change course now early on if I can't. And so what we did there is the goal at the Center for Child and Family Services was reunification after children were taken from the home, oftentimes due to abuse and neglect. So it was a really challenging position, but it was also such great experience. I got to work with clinical psychologists, social workers. There was a lot of community psychology. And you really see when you have those boots on the ground in those type of environments, how difficult it can be for kids in these circumstances and for the parents. And so the most challenging parts were, the goal was reunification, and sometimes the parents just were not ready for various reasons. Some of the parents were struggling with addiction issues, and I went on to work in addiction later on. But being so young in this field, I think when I took on that position, I was 19 or 20. I had a lot to learn, and I had great people that I was able to learn from. So that was a huge blessing. And I really encourage our students to get that experience, regardless of what subfield you're interested in, just to see what you like, what you don't like. And you can do that while you're in school in various ways. I then went on to North Central University, and I continued in different areas of research and shifted focus a bit. I'm really interested in positive psychology and specifically gratitude, and what role that plays in different circumstances. And so my dissertation was on gender differences in gratitude, rumination, and social comparison through Facebook. This was back in 2015. Yes, 2015. And the findings were really surprising to me. I kind of assumed, to be honest, some of my hypotheses were a bit negative. I thought that people would use social media for social comparison in a negative way, like looking at upward social comparison, meaning seeing that someone has a nicer house than you or a nicer car, and then, what impact does that have? And I predicted that people that have higher levels of gratitude wouldn't, succumb to that as much. But what I found actually was that social media was pretty beneficial for my small group of participants that I had. So participants reported that the more they used Facebook, the higher their levels of gratitude were. And they were actually using Facebook for downward social comparison, meaning they would look at others who had less than them and they would feel more grateful as a result. So it was not what I thought at all. And this was a while ago now. And I think the findings would be different today. Particularly, we know that some of the social media executives, their feet have been held to the fire recently about, and rightfully so, things that are happening with Instagram and children who are targeted, et cetera. So I think the findings would be different if it was a different platform. There are more older people on Facebook, and the issue of younger people being targeted is typically on other platforms. However, I was still surprised. I expected something different, but that tends to happen in research. We find things that we didn't know we would. For those of you who do go on to PhD programs, many of our students plan to eventually. Just a few tips. Keep an open mind on what topics are of interest to you to do a realistic study. Take all of your mentors' feedback into consideration, whether it's your master's thesis here or it is a dissertation later on. Make sure that you take their advice because they're already where you want to be. So sorry, I froze for a moment there. They're already where you want to be. So you want to make sure that you're taking their advice because they're trying to help you. And I think sometimes students take things too personally. They don't want to take that advice. They want to forge their own path. Even if they're hearing, this is not the most realistic study, perhaps we look at it like this, they want to keep pushing forward. So take the guidance of the mentors that are there for you. I certainly benefited from that a lot. And the best dissertation is a done dissertation. So take the path of least resistance. When you feel like you're really married to an idea and your mentor is telling you something else, really consider taking that advice because you'll be glad that you did. Additional clinical experience. So I mentioned the Center for Child and Family Services already. When I was in college, I started as a therapist doing applied behavior analysis or ABA therapy. I started working in homes, doing private in-home therapy as a registered behavior technician, and did that for a long time. And then I went into work in the public school system and was helping neurodiverse learners transition into mainstream classes with neurotypical peers, because the district that I was working in did not have what are called self-contained classes, where children oftentimes on the spectrum are in a separate classroom. Many schools believe that integration between neurotypical and neurodiverse individuals is the best option. It really depends on the circumstances, but my role was to help those children if they needed support, if they needed academic support, if they needed, help with coping mechanisms, because it could be very overwhelming for children who need additional support in a large group. So I enjoyed my time in ABA therapy. However, there are things about the field that are controversial. And at that time, there were things that I saw that I just did not like. There are still children being restrained when they don't need to be restrained. There are children being isolated when they shouldn't be. Punishment is utilized inappropriately sometimes. There have been changes to the field that are positive since I was in it at that time. But I found something that I really connected with more, which is called pivotal response treatment, or PRT. And the Koegels, it's a married couple, they developed this subfield, and it's based in ABA, but it is more play-based and has a humanistic approach that I liked better. And so I went to train with them. They are at Stanford University now. And the Koegel Autism Center started at the University of California, Santa Barbara. And they really work with kids where they are. They work with kids in the community, whether it's at school or on the playground or wherever the parents will allow the therapist to come with and really help them with social skills, etc., role playing, all kinds of different things that can help. And it just has the benefits of ABA, but less controversial and more play-based, fun, and things of that nature. So I really enjoyed that. We also got the opportunity to take our daughter out there who is on the spectrum, and the whole treatment team was able to work with her one-on-one for a full week and taught my husband and I some tips and tricks for helping on a personal level with her as well, which was extremely wonderful, and we're grateful for that experience. Substance abuse counseling is something that I have done as well. So I worked in an outpatient program, but it was an intensive outpatient program, which means that the clients come every single day, or 5 days a week rather, for specifically opioid dependence. And I got so much great experience here. This helped me because the facility where I worked was in a low socioeconomic status environment, high crime, and I was able to work with people who really are an underrepresented population and needed the help. And it was great clinical experience for me. So I was able to do individual therapy there, group therapy. We ran many groups a week. And I learned so much about group dynamics and the best way to set up groups and the benefits of co-facilitators, so many things. And I really enjoyed that. I had a caseload of between 50 and 80 clients, which is very high. But that's the type of situation where you just don't have the budget to have as many clinicians as you need. So we were all very overworked, but loving what we were doing at the same time. Some of my clients were there voluntarily and others were court mandated to be there. And there was a really big difference in outcomes and in just general approach when you're working with someone who does want the help. And that's really important in addiction. The person does, as cliche as it sounds, need to want to change for themselves versus the court mandated path. I got a lot of courtroom experience in this position because we were frequently subpoenaed. So some of my clients were accused of committing crimes or they were involved with people who had. And so I got to learn a lot about that process and when you are subpoenaed, what you have to do. So we would frequently go to court, sometimes on our clients' behalf, and sometimes when our clients were being accused of various things. And then you just obviously go and share what's happening with your clients in treatment and the progress that they've made or not, whether or not they're following their plan. When clients were there because they were court mandated to be, I would follow up, of course, with that whole process. And it was just a really significant learning experience for me being a young person in the field and just kind of understanding about more of our legal system. I was trained in trauma-informed care at that time because we were working with people who were primarily dependent on opioids. So I learned that 85% of the drug overdose deaths are linked to opioid dependence. And it was very unfortunate how many people that we lost. We would do everything that we could, of course, therapeutically, but it's a terrible disease. And so clients would come as that with their primary dependence, but they would, of course, be sometimes experimenting with other drugs. And so it was a learning experience for sure. Opioid dependence is linked to trauma, so it's really important to do trauma-informed care in this field. People who have gone through trauma tend to seek drugs that are numbing, and so that is often why this is a drug of choice. And trauma-informed care shifts the focus from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. So figuring out why they got where they are and how we can move forward. I have seen all the other day in the lives. I've really loved this whole series. And one thing that has been mentioned is the importance of getting care for ourselves as clinicians. And I was fortunate that that was actually required in my graduate program. So I was able to go through that myself. And I really encourage anyone who's going into clinical work to do that as well, because it's really important to see kind of what we're bringing to the table in terms of our own trauma or background or anything unresolved before we can serve others. So I noticed that as a pattern with some of the others I wanted to share. Transition into higher education. I have held many different positions in higher education. I started as a registrar, and I was just a lone registrar in this small office with a million physical files. And from there have held many other positions. I worked with the Navy College as an academic advisor, and I would go out on the ships and do presentations on all of their educational benefits. I got to go on a submarine once, so that was really cool. And I love that. And from there, I was offered my first adjunct position. And that's what got me started in teaching. And I have been teaching ever since. I've also worked in academic leadership or higher education administration. So I worked as a department chair while I was still teaching, and then went into a dean position and was promoted to provost. And I really enjoyed those roles because I was able to kind of mentor faculty members and see kind of the other side of higher education. But my true love is teaching. So I transitioned back to teaching. And currently I'm at SPS, and I've been here again since 2017. And last year started full time, which has been wonderful. I just have amazing colleagues, and this is the best place to work. No day is the same here. So when I was first approached to do the day in the life, I thought, wow, how will I describe what I do every day? Because it's different every day. But as far as teaching, I know many of my students do want to go into teaching. So I just wanted to share a few things that we do. We hold office hours. We, of course, are in the discussion forums. There's grading, student meetings, and then content creation. One thing that we found is that students really connect with videos in classes and things like that. And so we try to do that as much as we can, not only for our own classes, but for any that need it. As far as administrative projects, we do curriculum development, various committees. Dr. Alicia mentioned career advising. We do every Thursday, quality assurance for the program, and events like this one. So there's lots of different things going on all the time, which is great. In terms of giving back, I find this to be really important. I do a social skills group at a local elementary school. I call it Friendship Club. I find that lowers the stigma and more people wanted to join. And I'm always promoting that with the kids there and trying to get them to get interested, because I found that especially since COVID, but in general, there are many children who struggle with social competency development, and the child doesn't need to be neurodiverse to need help with social skills. I mean, I think that it's a really nuanced thing that's difficult. And with Friendship Club, I'm trying to teach the kids to be, I have kind of framed the club around this book called it's about bucket filling, which means that you give to others, you say kind words, you do kind things, and it fills their bucket. So I always tell my Friendship Clubbers that we all have to be bucket fillers to be in the club. So we do all kinds of projects to help. And most recently this month, we did an Adopt a Grandparent event, and we were able to make a lot of Valentines for 4 area nursing homes. I don't have a final count on it yet, but it's over 130, and our goal was 60. So I'm very happy. We made a bunch of Valentines within the club, but also we recruited teachers and friends to get their kids to make Valentines. And so those will be delivered tomorrow. That's exciting. Some of them have already been delivered. But just getting them to see the benefit of giving to others. And that also helps their social skills because they work together. We create stations to make these gift bags for the grandparents that we're adopting, and they get to collaborate with one another, and they get to connect in a time where sometimes that's difficult. It's hard to connect. I volunteer for the media center there as well, doing early literacy projects at this local elementary school. And I do a lot in terms of advocacy for the neurodiverse population. So one thing that I do is I help parents with children who need supports in the public school system write IEP goals, which is an individualized education plan. And so they're able to better advocate for their own children in terms of what they may need in the school system, because that can be very overwhelming. And my husband and I hope in the future to open a community center for parents and families of neurodiverse children, so they have some guidance and support as they try to seek the services, because it's extremely difficult to find information. And there are so many services that people don't even know about because it's hard to find. My husband is the swim coach for the Parker Foundation's program called Swimming on the Spectrum, which works with the Special Olympics. And so every Saturday, he is the swim coach teaching neurodiverse individuals from toddlers to adults how to swim. And I help him with organizing that and recruiting people for that who are most at risk, because that drowning is a major risk for those who are on the spectrum or neurodiverse. Hobbies are important for everyone. It's funny when I talk to students about this, they kind of give me a glazed over look, like I don't have time for hobbies, but there's a season for everything. I remember feeling that way too. But I realized a couple of years ago that I wasn't making time for myself. And so now every single day I make sure that I at least walk in terms of exercising. And my husband jokes that he can tell when I haven't been for my walk because I get crabby. We need that time for ourselves. I like to read, write, do water sports. My daughter does surfing. She goes to a surf school part-time because it's very therapeutic for those on the spectrum and those who are not. And so I'm not as good of a surfer as her, but I'm learning. Tips for success. I recommend creating a study schedule. No matter where you are in your education, sticking to some type of schedule and getting in a routine is going to help you succeed. If you do something a little bit every day, it's better than, waiting to work on your schoolwork every Saturday all day, if you can avoid that. Stay connected. We have a psychology club. I think I saw that Casey is here, our president. We have a parenting club, all kinds of things going on, but just make sure that you connect with other people. Form connections with your classmates. You can do virtual study groups. Some of you can get together in person. I know a few of you do. And just make sure that you're not isolated, because that's really tough when you're online, is just being by yourself. You don't have to be. There really are ways to connect. We have events and groups and things like that. Form relationships with your faculty too. Just in the career drop-in hours last week, I was telling a few students, it's really important to start forming relationships with your faculty members early on, because those are the folks that you're probably going to ask for a letter of recommendation from later down the line. And if you need that for professional reasons or other programs, and we want to be able to write a great letter, and to do that, we have to know you. So we have a lot of students, but you can get to know us by coming to office hours and connecting via all these programs that we have. So just keep in contact, and we love hearing from you. So that's a wonderful thing to do. Try to get experience in different areas of the field. It's okay if you don't know what you want to do right now. Psychology is very broad. And a lot of the day in the lives that I have seen, I've been so impressed by all the faculty members, because there are some people who chose one path and they stuck with it, and they've been extremely successful in that path. They're experts in that area, and that's been that. But you also have people like myself who've jumped around a little bit. So I've loved clinical psychology, and I'm passionate about specifically the neurodiverse population, so technically developmental psychology. working in higher education too. So it's good to know what path you want to take, especially in terms of what program you're going to be doing and what will support that. But don't be afraid to get experience in different areas. And it's a good chance to do that while you're in school. It can be in the form of an internship, but you can also just find positions, part-time positions in different areas and just see what you like. This is a good time to do that. And utilize resources that SPS provides. We have so much available to you, and I really recommend that you use it. So career services, the drop-in hours we've mentioned, events like this, it's great that you're here. Counseling services if you need it. Sorry. Counseling services if you need it too, we have that available for you. So the key points, there's a lot of options available to you within psychology. The field is so exciting right now. We don't have anywhere near the number of people that we need to work in the field. So positions that used to require a bachelor's or a master's degree, you can get your feet wet without any degree in some situations. I was just meeting with a student last week and we did a career search and we found positions that she could be doing now while she's in school, just getting experience under other people. You don't have to know exactly what you want to do today. I think Dr. Alicia and I get these questions all the time at career drop-in hours about specific paths and what can I do with a degree in psychology? And the truth is you can do a lot. And try to get experience in the areas to see what you love most. And I think that you'll be happy with that. Any questions?
Thank you, Dr. Hansen. So you can type your questions in the chat or you can raise your hand and I'll call on you. Thank you so much, Dr. Hansen. I have some questions for you also, but let's give the students an opportunity to ask questions first. So Jen, career switch. Jen, can you provide a few more details about your question? And if you need to unmute yourself to talk, go ahead, or you can just type in the chat. Okay, while waiting for Jen to give us more details, so we have a question about career drop-in hours from Angela. So career drop-in hours are at 8 a.m. on Thursday. If you are on the West Coast or if you are in the Midwest, don't worry. We are not expecting you to show up at 5 a.m. If you're in California, you can send us an email and we can make an arrangement for a different time. Both Dr. Hansen and I have hours of availability and we can provide you with a link for where, you can come to meet with us. Okay, so transitioning from business administration to youth studies, how do you gain experience? Any advice?
Well, I would just take a look. So Jen, without a little bit more context, I would take a look in your area and see what options are available in youth studies. Youth studies is a growing field as well. There's so much need for that right now. So I would just take a look at what you have. You'd be surprised at what skills you can use from something like business admin to youth studies. And just remember that you are constantly gaining transferable skills. So transferring from one field to another is not unheard of or unusual at all. But where I would start is just taking a look at the jobs that you really want to have and what's required for those positions.
Yeah, that's a wonderful place to start. And something to also keep in mind that in business, youth agencies require administrators. So it could be that you can, potentially find a job, doing administration work for a youth agency and then volunteer, as part of some of your work there. We've got some hands raised. So Herman, could you please, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, please. I was wondering about certificates or certifications and licenses. So, do you recommend getting a license or certificate right after the master's program?
It depends on what your end goal is. So I try to tell students not to sort of piecemeal everything. Just think about what you want to be doing in the future, long-term goals, and then determine whether or not the certificates are going to get you there. As far as licensure, what specifically are you referring to?
So I'm thinking I wanted to get an MSW, but since I'm in the psychology program, the Master's for Psychology in SPS, I don't know if I want to I don't want to have 2 degrees, and I don't want to be in debt for the rest of my life. So I'm thinking maybe a license or a certificate may help me. A LSW, no, LSCW. I'm not sure how it's called, but
So
yeah,
you have to get the LCSW, you have to get a master's in social work. So
Mm,
that would be the path. Because you
okay,
can't
all right,
because you can't take the LCSW test without doing a master's in social work first. So that's
right.
something to sort of consider. If you want, what I would suggest is if you can come to career drop-in hours, or if you can send Dr. Hansen or I an email. Dr. Hansen, how it depends on how fluid one of us might be in terms of MSW stuff. Everyone in my life is a social worker, I should say, so I'm happy to answer your questions. Dr. Hansen, I don't know how prominent social workers are in your life, but
No, everyone in my life is not a
okay, well,
social
everyone
worker.
in my
Dr.
life is a
Alicia is your
social
gal.
worker, Herman. So please, send me an email. I'll put my email in the chat, and we can have a good conversation about that. But I 100% recommend, come to drop-in hours or schedule an appointment with me so we can have a more detailed conversation that's really specific to your interests and needs. So thank you, Herman. And Ashley, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Hi. So, good morning, everyone. Well, afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm actually an aircraft mechanic, and I am completely changing my field. At the current moment, I am volunteering for a nonprofit, so I am um basically learning how to take clinical notes, and I have multiple clients. So I was just wondering, I guess I'm stuck between the path of whether I want to go for a master's in counseling that I have seen in Hunter, as well as Columbia University, that you do come out with licensure. And I do want to work more with the trauma group. So I'm thinking either, like, what would you guys recommend pathway wise? Would you recommend going for the counseling, the clinical aspect, or going for full on psychiatry to have the best experience with trauma in the psychology field?
So Ashley, I'm going to pause for one moment. I'm going to ask Dr. Hansen to address that more generally, but in terms of your specific path, I'm also going to recommend that you come to drop-in hours. So everyone who has a question about their specific path, we're going to answer questions generally, but we really want to, since there's so many of us here, there's 36 of us, we're not going to go in depth as we would in drop-in hours. So Ashley, I'm going to 100% say, please come to drop-in hours, sign up for drop-in hours. And if you can't come at 8 a.m. on Thursday, let us know and we will 100% schedule an appointment that works for you schedule-wise. But Dr. Hansen, please, some general advice on transitioning, on the path, etc.
Yes, so great question. Just to keep it general, with the psychiatry is a medical school path, so a completely different path. And as far as working in trauma, you can do that in either of the fields that you mentioned, but you would have to ensure that you meet your state's requirements for licensure and things of that nature if you do want to work clinically with clients.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, do we have other questions, comments? I don't see any hands up right now. Oh, Casey, go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Hansen. How are you? I was just curious, what skills did you find helpful that you had from your previous careers when you're honing into your adjunct position? As that is something I'm also interested in doing. So, yeah.
Hi, Casey. It's so good to see you. Everyone, Casey is president of our psychology club. I think you'd be a great instructor, Casey. The skills I would say that are helpful are, from clinical work is just having compassion for others is really important, because we find that our students and all of us need that. So it helps as an instructor. But also, just being very organized is helpful in teaching because you have a lot of students and a lot of different needs. Being aware of community resources. I think when you have a clinical or counseling background, you're used to always kind of being aware of what resources are available and you can provide that. And so, yeah, I think all of that comes into play. And as honestly, as a student, and you're an excellent student, you kind of get to know all of your faculty. You can ask them all questions and you get kind of used to academia a little bit early because, you know, you're sort of asking the right questions, you're already involved and sort of aware of what it is you want to do. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I wanted to ask a follow-up question, and then we'll go back to questions in the chat and also ask for more hands to be raised. But you mentioned compassion. So very often students will say, I have a big heart. All of my friends come to me for advice and, you know, I'm so compassionate. But as you and I know, that's often not enough in terms of just being a clinician. So could you talk about what skills are important to being a clinician? And in your answer, if possible, can you talk about the role of going through therapy yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of people talk about that, and they also talk about being empathetic or being an empath. These are sort of buzzwords that I've been hearing lately. I think in terms of clinical work, you really have to have the ability to separate. As I mentioned, that's kind of why I jumped into such a tough position when I first started, because it is hard. So you cannot take on other people's problems as you're helping them work through their own. And I think one thing that lends itself, excuse me, a skill that lends itself both to clinical work and to academia is making sure that you're able to hold people accountable for their own stuff. Because all of us are walking a journey. All of us have gone through adversity in our lives. We've all had individual experiences. And so whether you're working as a clinician and you're helping somebody who perhaps wants to get back on track, or they have specific therapeutic goals, or you're working as an instructor and you're helping your students, we always need to be able to hold that person accountable for their own goals. So I can walk you through what it looks like to get your education, get your experience. These are my tips and tricks, but you're the one who has to do the work. And whether that's clinical work and going through the therapeutic process, or if it's as a student, you know, writing that discussion post and getting everything in submitted, ultimately the other person is always responsible for themselves. And I think sometimes in clinical work, one of the reasons for burnout is clinicians tend to take too much on as though it's their fault if someone isn't progressing or if that person's problems become their own. And that is not what we want to do. And I think that leads to quick burnout and a lack of success in general in that career field. And I'm sorry, Dr. Alicia, I know you had a second part.
Really going through therapy yourself, to finding the proper supports, and then what role does being organized play in all this?
Yeah, so I would say going through therapy myself was really helpful because I was able to learn the tools to help myself through difficult situations, because we all go through stress and things like that. It doesn't have to be anything major to be able to get support, even from our counseling services department, you know, for our students and things like that. But just being able to have the coping skills to get through difficult situations, to build resilience. I think that's something that's very important, not just as a clinician helping clients, but also for students. And if you want to go into being an instructor, helping students build resilience, it goes hand in hand with the accountability piece, because we have to be able to get through hard times. And I think going through therapy myself helped me with that. The things are not happening to us, they're happening for us. And so that's what I always encourage my students to know as well. Staying organized is really important, because I think that the routines and the habits that we have really lead directly to success in any environment. And I think that students who get behind with their work or get overwhelmed, because you know, most of our students wear many hats, and most of the students today do everywhere. So whether you have a family and work and school, having a consistent schedule every day I wake up very early at the same time every day, and I have a written down schedule that I really try to adhere to, because in order to get all of the things accomplished that we all have to in a day, we have to just stay organized on top of things, and we have to hold ourselves accountable. We have to know that, we're responsible for our success, but we're also responsible for any setbacks that we have. And that's okay, because that's true for everybody.
Hello. I do have a question. My name's Kevin Ramser. I apologize. I logged in with my phone, so I don't have the raise in hand option. But I have two questions.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Okay, so my first question, is applying for scholarships from CUNY SPS a good thing?
Absolutely. Yeah, we do have many scholarships, and we definitely encourage you to apply for them for sure.
Okay, and how come counselors and doctors, and social workers and psychologists, why do they avoid speaking about religion with their patients or their clients?
I don't know that they all avoid speaking about religion. I think that it's important to be inclusive, and there are many different religions and backgrounds. And so I think that also to that effect, there are lots of different types of therapists, and some of whom definitely utilize religion as a cornerstone of their treatment. So I don't think that necessarily they avoid talking about it.
Oh, well, sorry, I was referring to the doctors and psychologists that I had in my past. Oh, so is medication the answer then?
Well, medication would be associated with, if you're referring to medication for psychological conditions, that would be through a
Yeah.
psychiatrist. And that's not my background, so that it wasn't covered today.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so Kevin, some psychologists do specialize in psychopharmacology. A former colleague of mine who was a physiological or neuroscientist, PhD in psychology, specializes in psychopharmacology, but not all of us do that type of work. And that's something, to always keep in mind. And most of us, many of us go into different types of work because we think there's multiple solutions, right? So, how in intro psych you were told, be wary of single variable answers. Well, that applies to everything. Be wary of single variable answers. Now, speaking of which, Dr. Hansen, we had a question about finding volunteer opportunities. So you talked about getting clinical experience early. Now that's something I can really relate to. I volunteered at one of our largest a couple of our largest hospitals in the New York City area, and I was in the psychiatric emergency ward for one day, and one day was more than enough for me. So I 100% understand, what you mean about find out what you like, what you don't like. Can you tell us a little bit about how you went about finding those experiences? So what was it that allowed you to gain the experience?
Oh, yes, great question. I reached out to faculty members, and I was always asking, if you hear of anything I can do, I'd really love to get some experience. And one of my professors was well connected in the area, and she put me in touch with someone that could help me with my first position. And so that was really about just open communication with faculty. For some of my other positions, most of them, I just found them from local job boards, and I have referred our students to do that as well, because you can get paid for some of this as well. There's such a need for, help in this area. And so you're not going to be, working individually with clients, but you could really be providing a lot of great support and getting good experience at the same time and getting paid for it. So that's always an option too.
Thank you. So we have a question in the chat from Linda. Dr. Hansen, do you find it harder to assist the neurodiverse young children who need parental consent? They need to be accountable for their actions compared to the adult neurodiverse population. So working with adults versus working with children, and what are the obstacles in both cases?
Yeah, and so I have only worked with children who did have parental consent for me to work with them. And so in terms of holding them accountable, I don't approach working with the neurodiverse population with sort of a punitive approach at all. I'm always thinking about why someone is doing what they're doing. So with our neurodiverse population, sometimes there can be communication barriers. I have worked with many clients who are non-speaking. And so sometimes when people see behaviors, including violent behaviors, they want to address the behavior, which was one of the challenges I had with applied behavior analysis therapy. When more is going on, behavior is communication. And so I think that's really important to keep in mind. So in terms of holding accountable, I really try to dig into the why so that I can provide more supports. And working with the adult neurodiverse population, really oftentimes when working with adult neurodiverse individuals, they're seeking out the help in the first place themselves. So that can be a bit different and of course varies significantly depending on goals and abilities and needs. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. We have another question from someone who works with works as a case actee and wants some suggestions for how to better communicate with employers. And since you've worked in case act, as you know, there are sometimes a lot of challenges, clashes of views. So what would you suggest for better communication with employers, particularly for people who might be neurodivergent?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say that in communicating with employers always, my recommendation is if there's concerns, like for example, when I was working in substance abuse treatment, I found that we were understaffed and sometimes there were safety issues and all kinds of things that are still going on today in many facilities. If I had feedback or wanted to communicate a concern, I would always state that concern, but I would also propose at least 2 solutions. And so I recommend doing that. For neurodiverse individuals where communication can be challenging, I think that email is really ideal because you can sort of write that out and edit it as needed. But I think always bringing solutions with concerns is helpful when you're communicating with any employer.
Thank you. And there are additional questions. Oh, there's a lot of thank yous in the I thought there were additional questions, but there are lots of thank yous. So for anyone who's interested, we do one-on-one sessions for career drop-in. It really depends. There are days when there are a lot of students, and so we do more of a group meeting, but there are other times when we do one-on-one, 10-15 minutes. It really depends on how many people are there. But if you really need one-on-one time, we can provide that as well. So we've got people praising Dr. Hansen in the chat and saying they really loved taking a course with her. That's very nice. We like hearing that. Now, question from Melody, what kind of clinical work can one do before licensing? Thank you.
So there's a lot of clinical work you can do before licensing because as I said, this is such an in-demand area. You're not going to be working individually with the clients. However, I was talking with a student last week at Career Drop-In Hours. We popped in her information on Indeed and we did a job search together just so I could give her some examples. There were psych tech positions available that did not require a degree, working under someone, just assisting at a local hospital. There are research assistant positions that are not necessarily clinical, but you could still get a lot of good experience doing that. That was you, Kanisha. It was. I wasn't going to call you out by name, but yes, it sure was. And so there were a lot of positions, ABA therapy positions, like I mentioned, what I was doing, those don't require a degree at all. You start as a registered behavior technician under another therapist, and getting promoted in that is based on hours of supervision. It is not based on a degree. So you can do this while you're getting your degree. Many different options there that are available.
And something to keep in mind, clinical experience can also be volunteer, right? So there are hotlines. There are hotlines that, and especially, the Good Samaritans, and there are various crisis hotlines that look for volunteers, and that's a good way of getting clinical experience. Volunteering in a hospital. Hospitals very often are looking for someone who will volunteer, particularly if you're bilingual. I volunteered in hospitals in New York City doing Spanish English translation, and that's how I got my feet wet with clinical experience. Now we have more questions in the chat. We've only got 5 minutes, so we're going to try to cover as much as we can. So resources. So can we provide a list of resources, volunteer opportunities? So Dr. Hansen and I manage the LinkedIn page for the psychology program. Please join the LinkedIn page. You can also send an email and we'll send you that. Now, and then we have a question about lived experience. So for those who have disability or who have have experienced mental health challenges, how can having that lived experience shape their potential in terms of going to graduate school, etc.?
I would say that if you are applying for graduate school, Dr. Alicia and I serve on the admissions committee for our master's programs, and we read all of these essays, admissions essays. So I would include the experience that you have and what brings you to psychology, because something brought us all here, and having that human touch in your application can be very beneficial because you have a passion for it and a reason that you're here. And we want to hear about that when you're applying to programs. And we're not the only ones. If you're applying elsewhere as well in the future, I would encourage you to share that.
Yes, but share it within limits is also something else I want to say. Don't make your entire essay about that lived experience, because what we want is to see lessons learned to a certain extent and how you would work within the program. Something else to keep in mind, you don't have to share that experience. If you're someone who has, struggled with different issues in the past, you don't have to disclose that you've struggled with those issues. It is private. We value your privacy. If you want to keep it to yourself, you can keep it to yourself. So, the most important thing is sharing about your academic experience and your academic journey. And that, really is what makes a difference in terms of letting us see that there's a path, just as Dr. Hansen let us see, her path. So are there more questions in the chat? Oh, I see. Thank you. So thank you, Olivia, for joining us. Very happy to see you. We see a lot of familiar names. Very, very good to see you. I see Sarah. I see Yvonne. I see a number of different names, Linda, that are familiar. Dr. Hansen, to wrap up, like, what would, you've had a long journey that may not seem as long to some, but like you, I started very young. I went to college at 16 also, and I know that can sometimes create a different path than people who go a little bit later to school have. What I would say, what are the major lessons that you got from this journey, and what do you think is most important for others to know?
That's a great question. And how fun that you also started at 16. Yeah, I would say that sometimes the path is not a linear one. And every single experience that I've had, even though it seems so wide ranging over the years, has really led to the next. And so all of your collective experiences are valuable. I think that college is a really great time to explore what subfield of psychology you want to do. So try to get the experience as best you can, talk to as many people as you can, make this a time of exploration, because that's what it should be. And then once you find your focus, of course, you want to pursue that and ensure that the degree programs that you pick and the careers that you pick are aligned with your passion that started you in the field in the first place. And I think that's really important.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hansen. We are out of time, unfortunately. If there are follow-up questions, please email the psychology program. You can also email me directly or email Dr. Hansen. We are so happy that so many of you were able to join us today. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hansen, for sharing your story. And we will have Dr. Rick Perrone in April, who will share his journey, and that should be a good experience as well. So thank you, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you at other events. Oh, March 5th, Psychology Club event that's going to focus on occupational stress. It should be fantastic. For those of you who've been to any of the psychology events, they're really, 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 really fun, the Psychology Club events, and we've got Casey as president, and she's doing a wonderful job. So, and Chelsea, Dr. Hansen is their advisor. So we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you soon. And yes, we see your messages, we see the thank yous, and we thank you as well. So thank you, Dr. Hansen, and I'll see you in our next meeting.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so let's stop the recording and we'll go. All right, thank you.